And we're live. Welcome back to the Untold History Channel. My name is Ron Partain, joined by the infamous Warhamster, and we have a very special treat today. A gentleman that I have come to learn a lot about in a very, very short period of time. Wasn't really aware of Matt Ehret for the better part of my life, but I feel like I was deprived. Matt Ehret is the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Patriot Review, a senior fellow at the American University in Moscow. He is an author of the Untold History of Canada book series, a clash of Americans, of the two Americas. In 2019, he co-founded the Montreal-based Rising Tide Foundation with his wife, Cynthia Chung, who we hope to have on here again. So, and I, there's got to be some serendipity here because his books are the Untold History, and my channel is Untold History. So, that being said, welcome, Matt. Thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Well, we're definitely cut from the same cloth. I could see. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you guys. I'm very happy as well to have encountered your project and your work. So yeah, it's good that we're finally coming together.
Well, I stumbled on a video of yours the other day where you were talking about kind of like Putin and Xi and whatnot. And forgive me, I don't remember. I've watched so doggone many of them. I can't really isolate that specific one. But I shared it with Warhamster, and then he shared something with me and said, "Hey, we're going to have this guy. We're going to interview this guy, Matt Ehret. You guys should check him out." And of course, I had already seen some of your videos, and then I was like bouncing off the walls with excitement. Because I was so fond of your work, and then now I've kind of binge watched you over the last 48 to 72 hours just to kind of prep for today. So, Warhamster, did you have a thing or two you wanted to chime in on it?
We talk about the serendipitous part of it. It was about a month or so ago. I gave a live presentation, basically titled, Vladimir Putin, White Hat or Black Hat, and which I basically laid out objectively the case for both. And fortunately or unfortunately, the video didn't work. I recorded the presentation, but it didn't go through. And I'm glad, because it was only a couple of days later that I encountered your work for the first time. And we came to the same conclusion, but your reasoning was better. And that's why I really wanted to have you on, because, the Primakov doctrine is something I think we really need to get into. And we want our listeners to understand what are Putin's true motivations. At the same time, we recognize, we should define what's a white hat, what's a black hat. And for me, it's, if you are working with the World Economic Forum towards their global reset, that makes you a black hat. If you are working to stop that, that makes you perhaps a white hat. And the world isn't black or white. There's a lot of shades of gray. Mm-hmm. And so hopefully we can go through that when it comes to both Xi and mostly Putin's motivations. So with that...
absolutely, yeah.
No, well, let me ask a question. So is it possible, though, that somebody is in the public sphere actively pushing the World Economic Forum, but yet behind the scenes they're actually really white hat?
Yeah, I mean, in the sense of pushing the agenda of the World Economic Forum, yeah, history is made by often good people saying things that sound bad or associating with bad organizations or organizations run by bad people in order to conduct a political battle. Just as bad people are sometimes saying good things and associating with organizations that might be influenced by good people in order to conduct a bad agenda. So it's messy, it's you have to have a sort of appreciation for nuance when you're analyzing history. And that goes back all the way to the days of ancient Athens, and the stories of the cult of Delphi running operatives and sophists to undermine the soul of Athens as part of a political corruption that was part of what turned Athens from being a fountain of Western civilization and democracy all the way into becoming an imperial basket case, destroying, backstabbing its neighbors and trying to suppress the weak, city-states all around them, which resulted in their self-destruction. So there's a lot. Again, it's not so much the Hollywood type of script of, Lex Luthor versus Superman. You could very clearly see one is like pure evil and one is pure good. Human history is shaped by something more than that, and less than that in some ways.
Sure.
And I think that, like Putin is somebody who, what we've seen for the past 22 years of performance from this guy, from 1999 when he was put into power, and you brought up Primakov, that was, his key sponsor. He was brought in because all of these very evil I guess we can't really swear.
You can say whatever you want.
Anything you want.
Yeah,
Totally uncensored.
There's no censorship here.
Fantastic.
And
yeah,
this is we're talking about things that no child is going to understand, or so they're not going to be watching.
Well, okay, good.
Adult audience.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of evil sons of bitches who really thought that, Putin was their man, that they could trust him. And that's how he was able to gain a high degree of influence under this CIA tool named Boris Yeltsin, who was managing the destruction of Russia on behalf of, certain Rhodes scholars that we come to know and hate, like Strobe Talbot under Bill Clinton's administration, who was overseeing the dismantling and perestroika, the privatization of Russia. His direct assistant was Victoria Nuland, who worked very closely with a lot of the nouveau riche Russian oligarchs. And, the idea was to really do what Zbigniew Brzezinski had laid out very clearly in his grand chessboard in 1997, which is break up the Russian Federation into about something like 8 or 9 micro-states, micro-federations, all beholden to the IMF and Western banking complex. And they went pretty far. They accomplished quite a bit towards that aim in the 1990s. It was a disaster. Like, Russia's population collapsed. Their GDP went to hell. The ruble collapsed. Like, everything went to hell. And you had this organized crime syndicate of a deep state. There was always a deep state in Russia, but it took on a very virulent character under the oversight of these characters in the 90s. And that was a time when George Soros was also bragging, that his open society was just flourishing in Russia. He poured $2 billion in to help facilitate the privatization of pre-Soviet industries into private hands. And he was also encouraging the democratization of the former Warsaw Pact countries, right, during that same period. And every single country that got Soros monies, Soros regime changes, also got military structural adjustments to absorb into NATO. And since then, 13 countries since 1998 were brought into NATO. So,
Ron, you want to pull that up?
Oh, you got a picture of that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, if you got a picture of that, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's pretty telling. No, it's funny you brought up Victoria Nuland. I've had archived that 2-minute interview of her with what was his name? When they basically were playing Kingmaker in Ukraine in 2014. Yeah, there's your map.
Oh, Yatsenyuk, or you mean Jeffrey Pyatt, the U.S. ambassador?
Exactly. Yeah, so I've had that bookmark. We even played it on our one of the early episodes of our show, The Glitch, and it's if you want 1 2-minute bit of evidence of how our State Department is basically interfering in other countries' domestic affairs, I mean, that's it right there.
Yeah, and they could call it Russian propaganda as much as they want. They couldn't deny the validity of that recorded message where she's planning out and choosing who's going to be in the Ukrainian government after she helped organize with Joe Biden as viceroy of Ukraine the overthrow of a pro-Russian government. And there you have that image, right? So that's it. That's the 13 countries that have joined since 1997, NATO. And the policy has always been, again, full spectrum dominance to submit Russia as well as China. There's something similar happening on China's perimeter too in the Pacific, to an Anglo-American controlled military-industrial complex that has full nuclear missiles dominance over the world, that no country will be able to respond to a nuclear attack under this strategy, which was, in many ways, it was begun, even though I cited Zbigniew Brzezinski in 1997, he was already putting forth the doctrine of flexible nuclear response, limited thermonuclear warfare back in 1978, when he was also unleashing, this new asymmetrical warfare tactic of funding radical madrasas, basically everything we've come to know and hate of Al-Qaeda that came out of U.S. taxpayer money, organized by Zbigniew Brzezinski to turn Afghanistan inside out and absorb the Russians into their own Vietnam War that they could not extract themselves out of, which Zbigniew Brzezinski even celebrated himself in an interview around that same time in the 90s, saying was his greatest accomplishment. And he was asked, do you think that it was worth it? Like, now we have Islamic terrorism all over the world. Was it really worth that? And he's like, look, we got rid of the Soviet Union. It was worth it.
That's part of is a lot of that's basically Gladio B, isn't it? I mean, a lot of the stuff that Brzezinski did, he laid the foundations for all the stuff that we got with Gladio B. Operation Gladio was more of the stay behind, but Gladio B was basically the next incarnation. And that's kind of my understanding. Bouncing that off of you, Matt.
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah, no, exactly. They learned their tactics. They practiced with original Operation Gladio 1.0.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, how do you create little terrorist cells, anarchist assassins that would just, run things like the Red Brigades in Germany,
Mm-hmm.
or their counterparts in Italy or in the Netherlands. You had these things all over the place, utilizing fascist and Nazi stay-behinds that were, again, apparent. A lot of the people, the young idiots who were radicalized to join these cells, didn't know what they were a part of, but they were carrying out acts of atrocity and, again, murders of people like Aldo Moro, German industrialists like Alfred Herrhausen, Enrico Mattei, the Italian industrialist who wanted to develop Africa and break the control of the IMF. He was assassinated again by the same operation. So they learned their tactics, and then they just sort of, it wasn't that difficult to extend that into playing the Islamic card against the Russians, utilizing these Wahhabite radicalized sects. And the role of things like, at the time, there was a network in Pakistan as well as in Saudi Arabia that were more than happy to play along as providing logistical and monetary support. But again, this thing completely just grew and is still even being used today to not only overthrow governments in Libya and Syria, but also we've seen now evidence of many of these figures being funneled out of Syria through Turkey into Ukraine to fight alongside their Nazi brethren against Russians.
I would make the argument that the color revolution was performed in the United States in November 2020. So a lot of the same hallmarks, same kind of people in the streets, same kind of news media coverage, the manufacturing, the appearance of popular consent, all that stuff. They run the same playbook over and over again.
Yeah, this is all laid out in Gene Sharp, the guy who sort of is the father of the modern incarnation of color revolutions. It existed before Gene Sharp, but he sort of refined it in a science that they've been deploying since the 80s. It's all laid out. As you just said, in a very logical way. How do you create an artificial mass movement, and how do you weaponize the masses utilizing control of media, social media, perception management, to get an overthrow of a government which is not behaving the way that certain oligarchs would like a government to behave, which is in a national sovereign way, right? The way Gaddafi was doing when he was calling for a new regional economic bloc that would be able to invest outside of the control of the US dollar, settling trade agreements in dinar, as well as oil purchases and funding things like...
You cannot do anything outside of the dollar.
No, of
You're
course
a terrorist.
Yes. Yeah.
We've got a list of the countries that have been outside the International Monetary Fund's banking system. And every single one of them, it seems to be someplace we've dropped bombs in the last decade or two. So
I'm sure it's just a coincidence.
Just a coincidence. Well, you look at the, if you really want to go back to the Middle East and now that foundation, going back to Brzezinski for a second, they laid the foundations for the Iraq, for the Gulf War I in the 1970s. They were laying the foundations in the 1970s. And of course, then you have a Kuwait slant drilling into Iraq, and then Iraq saying, well, hey, they're drilling, what can we do something about this? And then the what was it, April Gillespie? No, we don't care anything about your Arab to Arab squabbles. You guys can do whatever you want. We don't care. And then the next thing you know, so basically Iraq gets permission from the United States to invade Kuwait. They go into Kuwait, and now we have a military presence in Saudi Arabia that we would never been able to achieve outside of a wartime situation. Because prior to that, what was our primary the primary location that we had for military presence was Germany. Right?
Yeah.
Now
exactly.
Take that. And now you add upon that, you stir up the all the tension in the Middle East. You destabilize that region, and then you get into the I'm having a brain fart. The plan to basically de-whiten Europe to get all the
Kalergi.
Kalergi plan. Thank you. God.
Kalergi.
The Kalergi clan.
Coudenhove von Kalergi. Yeah, right.
So I mean, these things are peripheral to kind of what we're talking about, but they're also relevant.
Yeah.
You know, they're relevant in the big picture, because it just kind of adds a little bit of color.
You can't really talk about the whole Middle East adventurism that America's been committing on without following the money and the war machine, the war profiteers and the banks. It's like I always say, all wars are banker wars. Follow the money. Yeah, billions of dollars were made by these never-ending wars, and they have to keep them going. You cannot turn off that spigot.
Let me address the map here so I can kill this thing. But this is important to understand, because when NATO promised that they weren't going to expand,
James Baker, not 1 inch closer.
Not 1 inch closer. And that was what year was that, Warhamster?
91.
So in 1991, they assured Russia that they were not going to expand any further eastward. And yet we have all of these countries basically joined NATO. So, from an American perspective, I say this: if Russia was putting biolabs and all kinds of in training military troops in Mexico, I guarantee you they would have done a whole lot worse to Mexico than what Russia did to Ukraine.
Oh my God, yes. Yeah,
and I'll leave it at that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if Russia or China were trying to persuade Canada if they just did a regime change in Ottawa and now we're trying to absorb Canada into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where they've already started installing anti-American missiles around the Pacific in Cuba and stuff. Yeah, for sure. You got to think like we would have a very different perception of what's going on. And that's exactly what we've been doing in the case of every one of these countries, and Ukraine and Georgia have been very high up on the priorities list of getting these countries. They almost joined NATO back in 2008, right around the time when Saakashvili, the other George Soros stooge, who was installed by Soros in the 2003 Rose Revolution in Georgia. He initiated a 5-day war with Russia. He just launched an attack on Russians in South Ossetia and induced a war. Now, he thought that Dick Cheney at the time, he had certain promises, and he thought that was going to be somehow a smart move and that the U.S. was going to come in and back him up. Now, Russia cleaned up fast. 5 days in and out, it was over. And he was put in his place. And luckily, at the time, you had a German, Angela Merkel, was smart enough to say, no, we're going to veto that. We're not going to let Georgia in. Ukraine, same thing. Had really tried under Yushchenko, another George Soros stooge who had really pushed hard after 2004, the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, that also saw the amplification into power of many of these unrepentant, unreconstructed second, third generation Nazis who had been holding this mythology that the CIA maintained for them for many decades, that the big bad guy of World War II was Russia, not the Nazis. And so they've been glorifying their Nazi collaborators like Stefan Bandera and Mykola Lebed with streets and statues named after these guys who carried out genocide against Poles and Jews and Slavs during World War II, working very closely with Hitler. So these are actually the national heroes, nationally sanctioned heroes who have shaped the admiration of many of these useful idiots. And Yushchenko made a high priority of not only making Bandera a national hero, that was his official position by an act of parliament, but then also pushed to get Ukraine to join NATO. Again, I think France and Germany both at the time said no, but it came close, and now they're doing it again. Back to your original question, though, that I didn't get around to answering directly. Can good guys ever do act in bad operations? Yeah. And that's, just to be quick, that's how Putin came to power, is a lot of very bad people thought they could trust him. He was really good at playing a good poker face. And again, acting like he was a corrupt jerk who was willing to go along with these oligarchs and these Western operatives. And as soon as the opportunity came about, he pulled the rug out from under their feet on many occasions, including in 2003, where he began a prosecution of a lot of these oligarchs who had privatized things like the gas companies of Russia. Put a few of them in prison. Other ones, to avoid prison, they escaped. They went to London or Florida or New York to safer sanctuary, where they conducted pro-Soros, anti-Russian operations from the outside ever since. Some of them stayed behind. Maybe a few of them decided to maybe play by the new rules. Other ones, kind of like the American deep state, that was really institutionalized after 1783. Some American oligarchs actually cared about the cause. Other ones were more just said that they were patriots, but really just stayed behind in order to sabotage the American Revolution from the inside, which they did in the ensuing decades. That we've seen all throughout the 19th century.
We are not fans of Alexander Hamilton here, so we're gonna be in agreement.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm not actually against Alexander Hamilton.
Well, it's the first. I'd love to hear the reasoning. My argument is basically he's personally responsible for the first bank of the United States, and I come from a finance background. I have a tendency to blame most of the world's evils on the banks. So
I'm going to send you my book. I wrote 2 volumes of The Clash of the Two Americas, going through sort of an anatomy of the history of the American deep state, these 5th columns, all the way to 1774. And actually, it paints a different picture.
Great. Would love it.
Definitely. I ordered your books. I ordered your books on Amazon the other day.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. I was going to send you.
I did. Okay. It's okay.
All right. Warhamster, I'll give you the free ones. But yeah, no. The character who plays like the real evil role in my story is Aaron Burr.
Interesting.
Really? Yeah. I'm definitely interested in knowing that.
Yeah. I guess. Quick segue. It's worth a segue.
Just do it.
I'll shoot out my my analysis. There's one of the chapters. I think it's chapter 4 and 5. That goes through the Aaron Burr's secessionist plot of 1804. So 1800, 1804, and 1807. So there were 3 attempts to break up the Union into 2 pro-British confederations and undo the revolution. The first one being in 1799, that it was sort of sprung with a couple of very, very high-level agents for the British. Aaron Burr was on top of all 3 of them. He needed to become president, though, against Jefferson. So he had to become president to be in a position to break the northern colonies that didn't have slavery and have them join British. At the time, it was pretty much, Quebec, Montreal, Halifax, and have them become a new confederation, dissolve the Constitution, and have a special alliance with the British. While at the same time, the slave power states of the South were going to have their own nation, and Burr was going to be in charge of the North. They would have their own thing in the slave power in the South, but again, allied with the British, who were buying up all the cotton anyway. So the British were the ones who were trying to maintain the argument that they were the only country that should have control of the monopoly of industry and textiles. They had already destroyed it in India anyway, right? Because India was like the leading textile manufacturer of the world until the British got in there and just like smashed everything and said, no, you're only allowed to make opium, and we're going to do the textiles and send it back to you. So everybody just does raw materials and stays backward except us. And that opium, by the way, we're going to send that to China, and then that'll keep them addicted, dumbed down, and easy to exploit too, right? And that led into a couple of opium wars.
Well, but so Aaron Burr. Yeah, I was going to say the British East India Company, these mercantilists, they had their own private armies all over the world. I mean, they were outside. They were operating outside the law. I call them pirates because that's what they were.
Oh yeah, them and it interfaced very closely with the City of London and the Bank of England as a private central bank above nations that was created in 1695. With a complete, that's when sort of the British deep state was fully institutionalized. Was the takeover of William of Orange in 1688, and that was.
I go back. I go to 1666 when the British Crown gave the British East India Company the right to mint coin, and I think that's when the Crown lost its sovereignty.
Well, there was a series of phases. You could say there's these singularity points where things really get into a new geometry. So yeah, that was a big one. Before that, you could say the merger of the British East India Company and the Dutch East India Company into the first sort of major merger and acquisition into a behemoth that has no allegiance to one nation or another. Was even before that. I think that was like 1609 or something.
Yeah, I was going to say it's the first multinational corporation, and we've been
and it was the same period, the same year. I think that they created the oligarchy created the Bank of Amsterdam in 1609 as the first private central bank, after modeled on something that was done in Venice around the Bank of the Levant Company and the Bank of Venice. But
so
that was,
13
I mean, people just don't know this
families of
history, right?
Venice.
So it's good to just have these bigger historical currents in mind when you're evaluating the present. I'm hoping people are following us because it's so important to have this in mind, right?
It really is. It really is, and I'm glad you're going back. I'm really happy that we're going back. You know a lot more about the ancient stuff than I do. I don't really I don't really delve into that, but it's you know, you've taught me a little bit on just from a contextual standpoint. You know, the whole point of my channel that I want to do when I talk about untold history is I fervently believe that things of yesteryear, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years, 100 years, even 200, 300 years ago, they are relevant today, but people don't understand how. And so, you know, the thing that Warhamster and I really like to do is we like to go back and touch on those things and bring them into the consciousness of today, so that people can get just a more colorful picture of kind of where we are, and realizing that this fight that we're in isn't something that just started, you know, a month ago, 2 months ago, a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. Yeah, it's the same. It's qualitatively, I mean, the same principles and ideas that have shaped history that are, I mean, the details change over many generations, but there's a higher continuity of principles, of folly, of wisdom, and people choosing to live by folly or tolerate folly and corruption, or resist it and fight for wisdom and love and truth. That is something you'll always find as a theme, regardless of if you're looking at ancient Indian civilizations or Chinese or, you know, 18th century American history. You'll always find that is the driving constant, the invariant that is always there. So yeah, no, very important. And this question of like sovereign nation states, right? Like the American, as a Canadian here, I didn't appreciate, and I'm trained as a Canadian not to appreciate 1776. That's the thing. It's a British colony of the North. It's a monarchy here in Canada. And there's a lot of effort over 200 plus years to brainwash Canadians into thinking that we are superior to the Americans because we never had to fight for anything. We never got our hands dirty. We were always just good, well-behaved, and obedient. And that's how we got our rights. And it's great, you know. We sound kind of American, we look kind of American, but really we're better because we are well-behaved, you know, and loyal. Now, it was only when I started my own personal journey, you know, and try to take my own education into my own hands after having my world turned upside down, as many people have a similar experience, you know, when you start picking behind the surface of 9/11.
Can I ask you a question? When was that moment?
2004.
Okay, so you and I are similar. And was 9/11 your red pill moment?
Yes.
Me too.
Yeah.
What specifically, if I may ask?
I downloaded a Mike Rupert lecture on BitTorrents.
Okay.
And I had a few friends who were conspiracy theorists earlier, but they were messy and sloppy minded about it. So when they were trying to tell me about international bankers and 9/11 and all these things, they were trying to give me like David Icke's books and you know, I was trying. I really did try. I tried to read it. You know, I respected these people, so I was like, oh, I'm going to read it. And I'm like, when I got to the page on shape-shifting lizards sucking your fear energy from the 11th dimension, I was like, no, I can't.
Yeah, it's so funny that you said that. It's so funny you say that. We were on the Glitch in the Matrix yesterday. Somebody was saying something along those lines, and I said, guys, we as truthers here, you need to understand there's things that matter and things that don't. And when you start talking about shape-shifting lizards and all this other stuff, you're going to lose people. You just focus on the things that are important. If that's true, there's nothing you can do about it. But don't try to red pill people with that out of the gate. You know, just talk about things that are important.
Don't do it. Yeah, it set me back, right? Like I lost a lot of my time. I could have been developing myself for all that time. And so when I saw Mike Rupert, who passed away, I think 2011 or something, but he was a good journalist. And he was able to concisely go through and break down
you know his story.
A little bit. I mean,
he was a detective in Los Angeles. He was a LAPD detective, and he was working the drug cases down there. And he discovered CIA involvement. In fact, he was one of the guys that grilled. I think it was 1994 or 95 when the CIA had to come out and admit that they were they had brought in all the cocaine into South
from the
Central
Iran
LA.
Contra stuff? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He was at that meeting, and he was one of the guys that grilled the CIA director that time.
Yeah, right. I remember him. Yeah, Gary Webb as well, right?
It was all based on the work of Gary Webb, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was very impressive, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, okay, you can make this intelligible. My mind was able to follow every single step. I never had that before, and so it gave me a sense that, okay, if this is knowable, if it's intelligible, it is teachable. I don't have, it's not like a religious thing where I have to just get somebody on revelation or faith, it's
right.
So for me, that was like a shock where I became more self-aware that I have a responsibility to be extra rigorous, because I don't want to do the damage to other people what was done to me by people skipping steps and just jumping to their convictions way too soon and prematurely. They didn't earn their opinions. You have to earn your opinion by making discoveries. So I was like, okay, let's go to source material as much as I can. So I started just taking notes of every single book that that Mike Rupert would mention, or anytime I heard somebody who had wisdom, I was like, okay, they're dropping this book. Let me go and buy it. Morals. And at some point somebody was like, okay, they mentioned Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma. So I'm like, okay, I have to hunt it down. So I hunted it down. So I made a habit of just trying to read a lot and read original work of people who made history for good or for bad. Right. And so that became something that I was able to work with. And in so doing, I came to the realization that though I thought, because you're like, okay, international bankers' conspiracies are definitely real. There's, all of our history has been a giant lie. Okay, well, what's true? Like, is it all a joke? Is this like, I might as well just go and get high right now and like time.
Speaking of, that's you'll appreciate this. That's how. So my boss at the time, he was he came over. I think this was like 2002, 2003, and we smoked the ball, and he turned on Dave Von Kleist's 911 in plain sight. It was about an hour and a half documentary that he had done, and that was my red pill moment. That was my red pill. I watched that and I was like, there was some raised some serious questions that I could not, under any normal circumstances, justify. I'm like, I can't answer that. And I mean, prior to that, I thought being a good Republican boy was the part. I was patriotic to my country, not realizing that I was part of the problem and in that process. So. Yeah. Pulling myself out of that, it's kind of like, in the Matrix when, you're either in the Matrix or you're not in the Matrix. And it's like, the world not in the Matrix is very ugly. It's very, very lonely. And
I think Matt's journey of how you were able to come to all the conclusions is interesting, because somebody gave me a copy of None Dare Call It Conspiracy several years before 9/11. So I was part of the way into the not trusting the government and thinking things weren't really as they seemed. But back then, you didn't have the ability to get the information like we do today. I mean, right now I can get a full education off YouTube and know most of the stuff that we need to know. But back then, you actually had to do the hard work of going and tracking down these books and actually reading them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that also sort of like locked it in a bit more. Like nowadays, the internet, God bless the internet, but at the same time, it's like if you don't already know what you're looking for, the internet's not going to help you. So you kind of have to have already the hunger that, okay, everything's bullshit. And now I'm going to like zero in on things, right? I'm going to hunt. But if you're just like a consumer of the internet material, like there's a lot of logarithms that have been put in the way of your mind and truth, right? To deflect you into all sorts of distractions.
Yeah, you got to have a pretty good filter to find stuff on the internet these days, and it's it's something you just develop over time, knowing what is bullshit and what isn't.
And it helps. As soon as you get a sense, okay, I'm probably being lied to about almost everything. As soon as you have that sense, you're good. You could generally follow your gut and figure some things out. But it requires rigor, right? You have to be more active-minded, not a passive recipient, like people who watch like CNN or whatever, even just all day long. They're just receiving and having other people's convictions and narratives impressed on their soul without participating in the process of like self-reflection. Are you cross-examining that new information with something you already know? No, it's just total malleability. It's not active. So you have to have a real active.
Well, I like to refer to people like us as self-educated. We have to educate ourselves because the system isn't going to educate us this way. Mm-hmm. And I was sent a meme the other day, and you'll appreciate this. It's this guy sitting on a pile of books. I'll actually send it to you. It says, self-educated people cannot be fooled by institutional propaganda.
Yeah. Yeah, generally you're going to be inoculated psychospiritually from just, like you said, just garbage. So yeah, the whole thing is this is why I go back to ancient Athens so much, because, not only were the founding fathers highly influenced by their studies of Plato. I mean, they were all Platonists. They were also studying Cicero, who was a Platonist of the Roman Republic. And that's why they were all trying to figure out, how do you create for the first time a society premised around something that had only been an idea in Augustine's City of God, or in Cicero's Commonwealth, or in Plato's Republic. The idea of a society ruled by philosopher kings, or where every citizen can be sovereign and thus a philosopher king. That was not something actualized until 1776, which overthrew the concept of hereditary orders defining your right to rule and determine what's true. It became all of a sudden, no, everybody is sovereign, not just one, and rights are inalienable. They're not just given or taken away by a power elite, right? So it's when you look at Plato or you look at Cicero, they're always cutting through the question of, how do you identify sophistry, like truth wearing only the facade of truth, or a lie wearing the facade of truth, appearing true, but actually having hollowness or self-contradiction embedded within it, which you can only get at by discussion, right? By Platonic dialogue, and get two ideas to really butt heads.
That's exactly what I was going to say. One of the things I'm really fortunate is to have made to be friends with Ron. So we'll be in the evenings, we'll be studying something, we'll call each other, and we don't agree on everything. And it's when we disagree where the fun really, that's where the magic happens. And we bounce it back and forth, and we end up circling around to something that probably is pretty close to the truth. And it's a process. And I couldn't do it. Yeah. It's much more effective to have a partner in crime who's very like-minded. So.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I think,
you're fortunate, Matt. You're fortunate because your partner in crime is your wife.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pillow talk, man. I'm not going to have that with Brady.
Yeah, no, it definitely it's very important. It's there for my psychological health. It's great to have a partner who. Yeah, you can have like.
It doesn't need to be said.
Yeah. But no, back to the theme at hand.
Yes.
We opened up the door to a lot of different lines of discussion that obviously we could tie it all together. But the fight over humanity, the way I try to approach universal history is a fight between two opposing impulses contained within the human experience as a whole. And it works quite well when you just have that idea that the continuity is that we are a creature that's partially flesh and instinct and all of those things that are of the material world, that's finite in space and time, right? We're born, we're going to die, all of us. So we're bounded in, we're not immortal in that sense physically, but we also have the divine as well as this other aspect to us, which requires work to express that ever better. And you could see people who, like Benjamin Franklin, use their time very well, and there's many examples of these singularities of human individual lives. There's not that many Leonardo da Vinci's, but there's some, and they use their time very effectively and very well to enhance their powers of creative reason and their identities to employ their ideas to help their fellow man and make institutions that would endure past their life expectancy. So across many generations. And Ben Franklin's, work and discoveries in electricity are completely tied. Even though he made those discoveries in 1752, they were tied to all of the work he was doing to create a literate, classically educated society that would be able to understand why it was worth risking your life to fight the world's biggest empire, even though you're a bunch of farmers with no training, for an idea of liberty. In the 1740s, Americans were just not at that place yet. So that's why he created all these libraries and all of these, publishing houses and everything else to try to like uplift people's ability to have that deeper quality of self-reflective of personages. So that was tied to the American Revolution. So his political work and his scientific work were two sides of the same thing. And it's like that for many of these great people.
You You mentioned the 1740s, and that's a decade I've been reading a lot about as far as the original Great Awakening happened to take place there and really laid a lot of the ideological foundations for what became 1776. I'm about halfway through my research on that, but you talk about what's going on in the world today, and Ron always likes to call it loves the term the Great Awakening. People are waking up, and it's not just in terms of the facts of how the government's run, but it's a spiritual awakening as well as what's going on. And I just see the parallels between what happened then and now is, well, hopefully we get the same result.
I do believe that the manifest, it's not going to take 40 years to manifest, just because things are moving a whole lot faster now with information. Back then everything was horses and carriages, and it took 3 months to get a letter across the ocean. Yeah. It's not that things move much faster now.
Light speed now, yeah. No, I think so too. No, it's possible that we could see a much quicker change, faster change than we'd ever experienced. I think it's already happening in many ways, in the sense that the financial system of the West is coming to its last legs here. It's coming down. The petrodollar is essentially at the end of its lifespan. And you have a fight over what the new operating system is going to be. And we're seeing changes happen that, we used to have to wait months or even years for the types of big sort of earth-shattering events that we're now seeing happening on a daily basis. So the span between big events is like compressing quite a bit.
Matt, are you paying attention at all? No, I don't mean to derail and go into financial, but are you paying attention at all into some of the crypto and the blockchain and some of those things that are? Are you plugged into some of that?
A bit. I'm not like. I think there's a role to play, and I think that I've studied the writings of Sergei Glaziev, Putin's advisor, who's becoming a major player right now in the reorganization of the Eurasian economic system. So he's a figure who's brilliant. He's a real patriot who's fought consistently for 30 plus years against this oligarchical parasite. And he's explicitly in his newest speech has a lot to say about the role of blockchain in building a multi-currency system that would be outside of the collapsing petrodollar, and it would be. So he goes into detail, and blockchain does play a certain important role within that overview.
Okay. He's also a disciple of Primakov, is he not?
Yes. Yeah. And he's also very much influenced. I've gone on YouTube and I've listened to a few of the speeches he gave in the 90s and 2001, 2002 to events that had been organized by the Lyndon LaRouche organization. Mm-hmm. So he's studied LaRouche quite a bit, and LaRouche's Science of Economics. He's talked about it. He's written about it thoroughly, more so than anybody else I've seen in that type of position of power.
And are you saying that the Russians are migrating to a system, to a financial system that's really kind of along the lines of what Lyndon LaRouche would want?
Sergei Glaziev is completely on board that.
Oh, that's music to my ears, man. That's a
the challenge.
Music to my ears.
I mean,
the challenge here.
Sorry, what was that?
Go ahead.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. That's awesome. I'm a big LaRouche
fan. It's heartening. But yeah, he gets the nature of the oligarchical parasite really well. He gets history really well. He gets the nature of the science of economy, the balance of markets and freedom with the necessity of, and he talks about this a lot in his more recent speeches, with balancing that with the need to harmonize, because you have to have both a strong sovereign national government, which could easily fall into rigidity and tyranny. That often happens when you have central power. But so he's very clear of this challenge of both balancing that need for a coordinated action, both from Russia, but also a regional bloc of nations, China, India, Pakistan, Iran. So you have to have strong coordinated action. You can't just have it all like divide to conquer and local control zones of mini influence, right? You have to have that, but you can't crush. You can't crush innovation and free enterprise and creativity. You have to be able. That has to blossom at the same time.
Right.
That's hard to do.
Well, that's kind of what the BRICS coalition was. No, I mean, where does the BRICS coalition kind of fit into this?
Yeah, I mean, originally I think the BRICS was a bad idea that came out of a Goldman Sachs bankers playbook originally, and And a lot of it was in there before 2011, before South Africa was brought in. A lot of it was hinged upon speculative activity with biofuels of Brazil that were really big. And also Santander was a big player. It's part of the Rothschild inter-alpha banking complex that was playing a big role in coordinating what the BRICS strategies were going to be. So I think it had some bad mistakes at its heart, but it's increasingly taken on a much more sovereign character in the last, I'd say 8 years or so, in coordination with other things like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which has grown immensely to include people like Iran and Pakistan and India that are now members of this other bloc, as well. And there's the ASEAN bloc as well. And it's all being coordinated now by things like the Belt and Road Initiative of China, which is a very different way of thinking about banking economic activity than the type of thing that we've had destroying the world here in the West for like 70 years. It's not based on usury or speculation. It's really based on creating new industrial bases, applying and integrating new inventions into the productive process, and thinking very long-term, like 10 to 20-year projects are being built. So it's a very different idea of investment than the sort of thing the Federal Reserve has told us we're allowed to do since 1913.
So, it's interesting that you say that. I'm sorry, Warhamster, did you want to say something real quick?
Well, this is one of the questions. I'm really glad you hit on China, because this is one of the questions I really wanted to ask Matt, because you and some of the guests you've had on have talked about, you've had a very, I guess, the picture you've painted of China is it's a very successful economy that is going to do quite well in whatever the new paradigm is going to be. And I look at that and I counterbalance it with the fact that they've still been most of the inventions, the stuff of theirs, they're stealing intellectual property from America left and right. We hear about the shoddy work, their bridges falling apart, and I'm very familiar with what their debt problems are. So could you kind of counterbalance the pro and the con there and tell us where is China?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, China has, if you just look at their magnitude of growth rate since 1997. It's a 10-fold growth rate from per capita GDP, and there's a whole variety of parameters, but it's on average about a 10-fold growth function, whereas America is a total of 15%. It's a different order of magnitude. Now, for sure, from especially the opening up period, orchestrated by Kissinger primarily in 76,
74, whatever, 70s.
Well, I mean, Kissinger had one different view. He wanted a sweatshop forever, cheap labor source of extraction from China. That was his plan, along with maybe the template for a global cultural revolution as part of a Great Reset. So these guys had one view. There was a fight inside of China at the time after Mao died, and the Gang of Four that ran the Cultural Revolution, which was an atrocity. They were all put in prison, and there was a fight between two different factions. Which wasn't really resolved. It's still not totally resolved. There's still a deep state in China. But it was a major point of choice of fight was around 1989. So during that period, there was a lot of, China will access American technology, American patents. They will start, the U.S. is going to outsource all of the manufacturing we once had to be sovereign, and we're going to have them do that, but keep them poor, except for an organized crime syndicate of billionaires on the Shanghai and Pacific or coast.
Can I interject? Can I interject and ask a question? Because what I look at, at least in respect from the globalist standpoint in the United States, is they were deliberately outsourcing their manufacturing jobs outside the United States to eliminate the middle class. It was they recognized that it was going to take a little bit of time, but we are witnessing that now. I mean, we are a service sector economy. We produce nothing. Yep. We are at the mercy of everybody.
That was the objective from 1971, and the floating of the U.S. dollar was to create a myopic, speculative society that would think only short term, would lose long term focus, and justify a new age of deregulation, the merger and acquisitions of corporations and banks into a smaller and smaller grouping of hands that would have more power than nation states. And at the same time, justify a new logic that would say, okay, you can make more money if you outsource your industries to Mexico or China. They'll do the dirty work and do it for $1 a day, whereas your workers in America or Canada would expect to be paid good quality labor. So that became the new type of slave master dependency. China became dependent upon the money that they would flow in. and the technology and other things that would flow in to get them out of poverty, but they were always kept with a glass ceiling. They were always kept too poor to buy the things that they consumed. And we were basically kept under a glass ceiling of decadence, of being a consumer cult that couldn't even wipe our own ass. You know, like we always relied on somebody else to do everything for us. So we lost our capabilities of being sovereign economically. And with that, morally, spiritually, psychologically, everything else sort of went to mush, right? And atrophied. So yeah, but that was the design. That was exactly the design of Kissinger and of people like Klaus Schwab, who was overseeing the Davos creation back in '71 as well.
Right.
So yeah, we don't have an economy. I often think of it as a time bomb. We have a time bomb where we used to have an economy. It's a big bubble upon bubbles.
Can I ask? I want to ask a question,
but I didn't answer the thing on the China one.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
I feel bad because we've like.
I know. Well, you got my creative juices flowing, so I'm super excited whether you can tell or not.
So I would say, like, look, right now, China they've gone through a period of like learning from like when you're gonna be a student of a master craftsman or something. You know, you go through a guild, you learn techniques, you repeat, a lot of copying. They've gone to a place now where if you just look at what's coming online in China and you compare it to like North America, they're going into like unknown territory at this point in terms of like 40,000 kilometers of high-speed rail with new technology in rail being built coming online that we've never done before. Like the tech came out of Germany. The Germans never did it, right? They shut it all down, their high-speed rail, before it went commercial. The Chinese, they did apply it, but now they've mastered it to the point that they're pioneering. They got 40,000 kilometers. We have 0. They've got, they're quantum computing. They're putting forth more patents than we are overall, even though per capita we have more. But if you look at where their patents are going, it's all tied to the industrial productive economic zone. Whereas most of our patents, if you look at what they're tied to in the West, it's the entertainment complex. It's not anything that actually benefits the overall or green energies. There's a lot of money towards things that will ultimately destroy your own economy. If you apply green energy like windmills and solar panels, if you actually do that and you make your economy dependent on those energy sources, you will bleed yourself dead.
That's right.
So that's the design as well. Whereas in China, they've got nuclear power, third, fourth generation thorium molten salt reactors. They've got like the biggest advances in fusion power prototypes of every single variety you can imagine. They've got it all. Like we've put all of our eggs in the Ehret in France, right? The tokamak, all of our eggs. So all of the other forms of fusion, we've just cut it all off. We've sabotaged. So I think that at this point, there's a lot of slander I'm getting.
Is it sabotage or is it deliberate to basically put the U.S. back into the Stone Age because the United States is the prize for destruction?
Yeah. No, it's a deliberate sabotage. Yeah.
Well, that really brings us back to the initial question, about white hat, black hat with Putin, because Russia's actions in the Ukraine are most certainly serving to hurt the U.S. dollar and probably helping to drive up our inflation, which is going to lead to America no longer being the monopolar entity. But that's also the exact same goals of the World Economic Forum. So that's where the confusion comes in.
Well, that's where you got to go to intent. The evidence that we see before us in the last, let's say, 8 years, do we see that the intent has been from Putin to always do what he's doing now in terms of the military intervention in Ukraine? Or has he done is there evidence that he's done things to try to avoid this outcome? And I would say when you actually look objectively at the data, he's done so much to avoid the current outcome, it hurts. In terms of like fighting for the Minsk II agreements to be honored, that was a viable way out of this crisis, demanding that Ukraine sign an official legally binding declaration to not join NATO or host U.S. missiles on their border. He tried really hard to get these things honored. He did work very closely with Yanukovych, the pre-U.S. color revolution leader of Ukraine, who was ousted. He worked very closely to make sure that Ukraine could develop an industrial base once more because, Russia wanted to buy the finished goods from Ukraine, whereas the European Union just wanted to use them for cheap labor and wheat and nothing else. So there was a lot I see of evidence, including the demand for red line back in December of last year, to simply say, okay, look, just don't do this. It's going to result in bad. And also, Putin has increased over the last year. I'm told by the media that he's like using his control of oil and natural gas as a weapon against the West. and he's been constricting them? No, he's not. He increased the outflow of natural gas by 10% over 2020 to Europe. He has allowed for payments. I mean, Ukraine, with all of their corruption, has still received massive payments for being a transit zone of Russian gas through Europe. He still allowed all that to happen. And despite it all, fertilizers, right? Russia supplies not only 40% of the gas and oil and coal to Europe, 50% to Germany, 54%, but also like so much fertilizer and something like 25 or 30% of the wheat. He's not withheld any of that. He's just simply now saying, like, okay, you've just confiscated our reserves, $300 billion plus more sanctions unilaterally, illegally. Okay, well, if you want to play that game, you have to pay us for our oil and maybe even our wheat soon in rubles. Yeah. Our US dollars are we can't even use US dollars. So it's like we would just be giving you free gas if we let you pay us in dollars, because we can't use the dollars. So you could say that, yeah, I mean, the oligarchy is going to use anything to attempt to try to get advantage. That's the way the game works. But to say that every act that happened that led up to an oligarchy trying to turn a situation to their advantage is all controlled, I think oversimplifies and misses the nuance of the fight a bit, you know?
Interesting. Yeah, that's that right there is when I opened the show, was saying how you described that situation better and from a different direction. That was exactly right there. That's what I want. I wanted my audience to hear that little 2-minute spiel of yours, and so we've mission accomplished now.
All right.
Awesome. No, I'd kind of like to not I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but I just kind of want to touch on this. You know, Warhamster and I, for the longest time, we look at some of the institutions that are the elite institutions in the United States that are really acting in concert to the destruction of the country from the inside out, specifically at the highest levels. And I always cite, obviously the Federal Reserve is one, but in terms of a policy standpoint, I look no further than the Council on Foreign Relations. CFR is by far and away, in my humble opinion, the chief institution for horrible policy. Yeah. Now, the one thing that we're postulating on this, and I want to bounce this off of you. Where does the Trilateral Commission fit in on that? We tend to think that the Trilateral Commission, what was it, 71?
73 officially, but 73. I mean, like the manifesto for it was written in 70 by Between Two Ages on the technical. Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote its manifesto. Between Two Ages, America in the Age of Technocracy.
So I look at the two factions as one is communist or Marxist, and another one is fascist. And I don't know if that's too overly simplified way to look at it, but I kind of feel as though that you had multiple factions that were trying to wrestle for control of the globe, that they kind of began to work together. They worked in unison a little bit, and that was what the CFR or the Trilateral Commission came in. Is that too much of an oversimplification, or is that kind of a benchmark of, because that's right about the time that we went off the gold standard, or we completely detached from silver, and that was towards the end of the Vietnam War.
Yeah,
that was when you started to get the Bushes to really starting to come in and play significant roles. Yeah. So I don't know. What say you?
Well, I try to always situate things in continuity. Certainly the Trilateral Commission, which was Zbigniew Brzezinski, David Rockefeller, Henry Kissinger baby. Mm-hmm. It was created as sort of a way to revive a blueprint for the New World Order that was first attempted and aborted in 1939-40, all the way through the 30s. And it was finally aborted, I think, around 1940, when the British decided to cancel their plans, because they before that, the British were not just appeasers, they were the primary backers, sponsors of Hitler and fascism more broadly, with their American fascist counterparts in Wall Street. Mm-hmm. They were the same characters who were funding the Smedley Butler coup, the bankers' coup in 1934. That was, people I think pretty much know about this. That was supposed to put a fascist puppet named Smedley Butler, a very seasoned and decorated. He was the most decorated, and I think still is the most decorated general in U.S. history.
Marine general, yeah.
Yeah. And he blew the whistle and went to the Congress, went to the media. You could listen to his speech even now on YouTube, going through, he took the names, he played along, he took names, and then finally blew the whistle, laid it all out. And that put the spotlight on this fascist plot inside of America. And many of these bankers around JP Morgan, around the Rockefeller interests, were also complicit in sponsoring internationally fascism. They were also part of what's called this think tank called the American Liberty League, that its whole purpose was to keep America out of the war. They later on went and transformed themselves after World War II and started working with Hoover to create things like the Heritage Institute, there's a whole variety of think tanks that these groups created to run the Cold War. Anyway, back to my point is the original design was to have the New World Order based upon a Hitler, Mussolini, Franco enforcement mechanism, with international bankers above that giving orders to manage the world order, with Hitler, who was going to have jurisdiction over like Germany. Russia would be like a cheap labor slave state. Britain was going to co-run North America with their Anglo-American fascist counterparts. They were also going to control like China and India. China was going to be under control of the Japanese fascists. Italy was going to control its own territories and jurisdictions of some of Europe, Southern Europe with Franco, as well as some Africa and some South America. Franco was going to control a lot of South America. So there was this whole like division worked out, but primarily it was going to be Japan, Britain, Europe, and America. Is that when
DC was brought in basically as the military arm? You have the City of London, the Vatican City, and DC.
That gets messy. At the time, America was still behaving in a more sovereign way. It was sabotaging this at the time. But all that to say, the Trilateral Commission, which was designed to revive that idea of the world being controlled by an Anglo-European zone, an American zone, and a Japanese zone. So that was the trilateral, the three partners, right?
That actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and they were doing like David Rockefeller was behind the scenes opening up the door with Kissinger to China, and the idea was to bring in, like, that's where the one-child policy population control came from, was Kissinger saying, okay, you're going to get our factories, but on the condition that you impose these Club of Rome computer models to now manage your populations. Otherwise, you don't get those industries you need to get out of poverty. So that was one of the conditions in 79. David Rockefeller was giving population control speeches with the Trilateral Commission in Beijing in 82, 83. So people are like, oh, that's one of the problems that I think Canadians and Americans who are being fed a lot of anti-Chinese hate propaganda, they're all being led to, or it's being spun that, look, China is the heart of global population control. They've been doing it for so long. That's why, they're on board with the Great Reset. And it's like, well, no, they damaged themselves a lot, but it wasn't a Chinese policy. It was Club of Rome and Kissinger and Rockefeller. And they're trying to heal out of it, right? They lifted their population cap to 2, then to 3. Soon it's going to be completely lifted. They never did it.
They still definitely have a demographic time bomb they're facing because of
they still haven't recovered from it. They did so much damage, especially culturally. It's hard to psychologically get people into a space where they even think, okay, I can have 2 or 3 kids. It's hard now to undo that conditioning. So they're trying, at least. They're building, and I see that there's intention. Whereas here, like, we've lost in 2 years under COVID, we've lost 2 years on average of life expectancy since 2019. Our people my age and younger not having kids. It's not happening. So we're going in the opposite direction.
Well, and I think a lot of that has to do with the Marxist programming in the schools and and the destruction of the family. But I mean, that's a whole nother ball of wax that we could.
Yeah. But there's a whole myriad of things. There's overall pessimism and cynicism in the future, a view that human beings are kind of viruses anyway. So why would you want to perpetuate a virus? Don't you feel bad to do that? Right? So all this.
It's all that mind control crap that people that they're buying hook, line, and sinker without ever questioning a thing. It goes. I'm sure you're familiar with Bezmenov. And how he talked in 1984. There's like they could never dream. The first phase of demoralization was completed by 1984, and that was 1984. That was 40 years ago.
Yeah, Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the cultural warfare is more important than anything else, and I think people overlook the importance of the cultural warfare of everything going back thousands of years. But to get back to your question on the CFR, yeah, that is that's a big part of my books. The Rhodes Roundtable movement, the Milner groups, which were created 1902.
I spent a bunch of time over the weekend researching the Rhodes Scholars, and I think you're the one who put the idea into my head. So thank you for that.
Yes,
very, very fun.
Yeah,
to work on
they're
that.
all over Biden's cabinet. You got these zombies. They're really processed. They're people who were, they thought they got a good deal when they were students with a scholarship, where they were processed through Oxford and given a special conditioning. Their talents were weighed, and some of them were brought into inner circles. Some of them who had less talent, or maybe less wit, or maybe too much morality, just didn't cut it, and were kept in a lower circle, or not even kept in. So sometimes you get like washouts or Rhodes Scholars who occasionally act like normal human beings. It sometimes happens, and that's how to account for it. It's like, it's not a guarantee that you're going to totally lose your humanity, but the chances are very high that you will. In that process. Yeah. And then they're put back into whatever target country they came from to advance a multi-generational agenda of essentially getting rid of nation states, the American Constitution, the Declaration, and bring about a world government under a new British-controlled empire. So it's the same old British Empire, but with a new name, more of an internationalist sort of language about it, but it's the same thing. With the same families ultimately at the heart. And this is a think tank that was created, the CFR, because there was the scholarship aspect, and then there was the coordinating body of several think tanks. The Roundtable was the original name of it, with branches in various Anglo-Saxon nations. The branch in America became known later on as the Council on Foreign Relations, after it was created in 1919. And then, well, it was created in 1919, but it took 2 years to actually be installed in the USA.
Right.
Royal Institute
International Affairs, right?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. Let me ask you this on the Roundtable, because my research, I've learned that the Roundtable sent some of their operatives into Russia in 1917, and obviously we know that the Rothschild banks were financing the Bolsheviks. And I don't call it the Russian Revolution; I say it was a foreign invasion, but that's neither here nor there. Are these not the same people that are also sponsoring the fascists? And this is kind of where Ron's question is. There used to be a right versus left on the international stage, and it appears that ever since the 1970s came around, both those two factions are now working together. That's kind of the thesis we've been working on.
Okay. Again, it's complex, but you're kind of right. I would say I would overall agree with that to a degree. Like everything that the oligarchy does when they try to use human beings as weapons to accomplish the oligarchical objectives, there's a certain amount of uncontrollability in it. Like humans can sometimes run the danger of acting in human ways, even if they're not supposed to. That sometimes happens. So there's many examples of this. We're talking about the Russian Revolution. So one thing, okay, yes, Jacob Schiff, Lord Milner, who was at the time the big controller of the Roundtable groups, the guy with Leo Amory, who ran the creation of the Chatham House, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, as you called it, or as it is called in 1919. This is like the queen of all think tanks, the coordinating center. This is what Hillary Clinton in America called, the mothership was the CFR, which gives her commands into the state. They were the same backers behind the anarchy color revolution of 1905, and then again, big hit in 1917 of the Bolsheviks, or at least most of them. They really had an idea, though. Their main priority or main preferred scenario was this guy, Leon Trotsky. He was supposed to be the king head honcho for as the dictator that would come out after the Bolshevik Revolution. Why did they do the color revolution on Russia at the time? Well, Russia, simply said, was one of the greatest allies of the United States, had saved America during the Civil War, had adopted American system policies of protectionism, of large-scale state bank directed credit for developing industries, and like the Trans-Siberian Rail. That was built with rail cars made in Philadelphia. It was done with the help of American rail engineers and economists. And yeah, there was like a common sense that, okay, we needed to develop, just like America had to develop its internal potential to be liberated from the maritime control of shipping, which is what the British controlled for their world empire was the shipping zones, right? And all of the choke points of world trade. So that idea of internal development, industrialization, large-scale credit, protective tariffs, that was adopted in Germany under von Bismarck to great effect. It was adopted in France in 1890s by Gabriel Hanotaux and Sadi Carnot, the president who was assassinated in 1895. They were all working with their Russian collaborators closely, working on diplomacy to keep themselves from falling into things like the Entente Cordiale, which was what was behind the unleashing of World War I. This war that never should have happened was these secret British negotiated military agreements, right? Whereby all of these allies who were working together started slaughtering each other for no good reason. And so these guys, again, like Bismarck, Carnot, Hanotaux, Alexander the First, Second, and Third, both assassinated, and their networks in Russia, as well as McKinley, assassinated in 1901 by British-run anarchist movement. Same type of operation that killed Alexander II in Russia. Same players, actually, exactly the same players. Prince Kropotkin was one of the key guys controlling the cells, kind of like an ISIS of their own day, you know. And they were all they all had the same understanding of the nature of this oligarchical beast that wants to reduce the world population and do that by creating divide to conquer, wars, all that stuff. So that had to go. That whole system had to be upturned. In Russia, one of the key guys at the time, who was the top prime minister and advisor to Nicholas II, who was the greatest threat to the oligarchy, was Sergei Witte. And he was the main architect. He was even pushing for connecting America and Russia by rail through the Bering Strait. All the way up until 1906, the Russians were funding American engineers to go and do feasibility studies on the connection of the landmass through Alaska.
Underwater or
at the time, I think it was originally they were looking at a bridge. I don't think tunneling was that advanced at the time. But it was going ahead, you know, like the financing for it was worked out. And the thing that stopped it was the first Bolshevik Revolution in 1905 that really sabotaged all of that. Witte got kicked out. A lot of his allies lost power. And then the big hit in 1917, it was completely overdone. And then the Romanovs were assassinated. So the idea was to have, again, Trotsky was the key. And Trotsky worked with three, ironically, or Ukrainian, he was part of a trio of Ukrainian psychopaths who all did very big damage in the 20th century in their own assigned parts of the world. One of them was Jabotinsky, who was arrested with Trotsky in 1905, the first time around, for being part of that first one. He was the founding father of modern political Zionism. Benjamin Netanyahu's father was his personal assistant. He was the guy who believed in sort of this Nazi-like, you know, greater Israel idea of subduing, that it's in Israel's destiny to not just control the Holy Land, but all of Syria, all of Iraq, all of Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, like all of that is greater Israel. That's our divinely ordained purpose. And everybody who doesn't fit our idea of the chosen people, they're subhuman, they're Untermenschen, deserving of extermination. So that's like the most radical. What's his name? The first prime minister of Israel, Ben-Gurion, called him Vladimir Hitler. So his name was Vladimir Jabotinsky, but he called him Vladimir Hitler for a good reason. So that was one guy. So he created this movement. And then you had another guy named Alexander Helfand, another associate with Trotsky, who was the founder in 1909 of an organization in Turkey called the Young Turk Movement, which was another anarchist movement to disrupt the pro-industrial development groupings around that were then in power in the Ottoman Empire that were working with Otto von Bismarck to create the Berlin to Baghdad Railway. That was seen as a death knell by people like Halford Mackinder, one of the key guys who worked with the Round Table. He was a Fabian. They recognized, like Zbigniew Brzezinski did later on, he was a follower of all of these guys, that if you have these different cultural groups of the Muslim world, the Christian world, the Chinese world, all working on developing their potential together industrially, then the British will not be able to exist in that type of world of cooperation. It can't work. So that had to be destroyed. And so the Young Turks movement was very useful at creating the first Balkan wars against Russia that weakened Russia. It overturned the power structures of the Ottoman Empire and weakened them to prepare them for dissolution later on. And he was also a big financier backer of Count Kalergi von Coudenhove of the Pan-European Fascist Movement in 1922. Him and I forget which Rothschild were the money bags behind that, which brought together people like Hjalmar Schacht was a founding member, Hitler's banker. Mussolini was a founding member. So people, American bankers and industrialists were founding members. I think Warburg was a part of it after they'd done the Federal Reserve
Jekyll Island.
Yeah, Jekyll Island. So yeah, I mean, you had a confluence of people who seemed to have very different ideologies, seemingly incompatible. Some communists, some fascists, some American industrial capitalists, but they were all coming together for this. What was Kalergi's Pan-European movement? It was basically a world government idea, right? Of absorb and homogenize all of society into a one superstate and get rid of nation states.
And these guys are all eugenicists to one degree or another, are they not?
Degree or another. Some of them hid behind sophistry, but ultimately, yeah. If they weren't eugenicists directly, then they were definitely all Malthusians. They were religiously devout Malthusians in the sense that they believed in the Malthus mathematical formula for population control. And yeah, so this is what became at the heart. That's at the heart of the creation of the European Union later on. Was the Kalergi Pan-European movement. So you can just see how the current problems in Turkey, the ideological new Ottoman Empire logic of subduing, like what do these people think of Turkey's destiny is to own like all of the Middle East and as a new sultanate, a new caliphate. Same thing for these fanatics around Netanyahu and all of his Likud followers who are followers of Jabotinsky. And Trotsky, again, get back to your question. So he was supposed to be the top dog chief forever of Russia, who was going to fulfill that objective. And his idea was permanent war, permanent revolution, that we will have, the Bolshevik Revolution would be the first part of the creation of a new type of human being. So Homo Sovieticus, that will cleanse society free of all of the traditions of history and everything else. And we're just going to be this new mechanized automaton, but also tied to the banking complex of people like Armand Hammer, who ran the American banking industrial complex that was like then taking control of the Russian economy in the 1920s under the new economy policy of Trotsky. Now, Trotsky wanted to just use that as a means to an end, which was ultimately, again, get revolution around the world into a maximum. It's very mystical, but the idea was get society into a state of such intense chaos that a bifurcation point would hit whereby a resolution to the trauma could be introduced, which was effectively some utopic world order, right? It all comes to the same thing, whether it's
you're basically talking about the revolution. You're in a constant state of revolution.
Yeah, constant state of revolution, constantly, keep people in a state of constant fight. And that was his this is where you get the human element in Russia that resisted that, because Trotsky was kicked out of Russia in 1927. Why was he kicked out? That's where you get some complexity, right? Because there was a faction within Russia that said, no, let's not do that. Let's just try to figure out how to do socialism in one country first. Let's not worry about the world. Let's just try to do it here. Let's try to get rid of hunger and poverty. And let's just try to figure that out. Because right now we don't have an economy. And there was a big, huge fight. So the Trotskys and some of his network were expelled. They were never allowed to return. However, a lot of his network, which was highly integrated into the British fascist networks, that they stayed behind. There were stay-behinds in Russia and they had these Fabian society techniques of infiltration permeation, military, academia, the civil service, everything. And a lot of these cells and cells within cells remained loyal to that strategy. They were very good at that. Kind of like, again, there's some overlap with the Theosophists and Fabians and Satanists that we're still just piecing together here, but a lot of the materials come to the surface and it's interesting. This resulted in 2 attempts to kill Stalin, which today we're told by a lot of Council on Foreign Relation funded narratives that were created way back in the 1930s, that the Moscow trials were these just Stalin purges to destroy his enemies, but there was nothing to it. No, there was something to it. Those were serious attempts. Those trials were legit. And there's now declassified information, which has been kept classified until 2017, which has now seen the light of day, where there's a lot corroborating that these were real complex conspiracies. to bring back Arm & Hammer, and who was sort of like the George Soros of his day, who was also kicked out with Trotsky in 27. He wasn't allowed to come back in until
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. I was actually trying to tell my mom not too recently that Arm & Hammer was a freaking communist, and she was like, no way, I can't believe that.
Yeah, it's like Maurice Strong, right? Like the guy's a CEO of a bunch of mineral companies and stuff.
Don't believe it. You don't believe it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean it ain't true.
No, it's Maurice to an end, right? Like they'll just use people's worship of money to get their ends, which is destroy the very thing that they're making money off of. They don't care about money.
I'm always pleased to tell people that Maurice Strong life ended a few years ago in exile in China. He was not welcome in a lot of the Western. Do you know the backstory behind that? Why he was exiled?
Yeah, Matt, Well, it was the scandal around Kofi Annan and the UN, right?
I guess I'm asking. It's been so long since I heard it. I don't remember if I had the facts straight.
It's too much of a side thing right now. But I would say that his last deployment was to try his best to infiltrate and get the New Deal, the Green New Deal, accepted in China. That was his main last assignment. The Chinese chose at a certain point to not commit suicide. That's why they sabotaged the 2009 COP 20. Was it COP 21 summit in 2009, or was it COP 19? No, COP 14. COP 14. That was it. And that was sabotaged. It was supposed to come out with legally binding carbon reduction agreements that would be enforceable by a world government, and that was the objective that Obama and Sarkozy and others were in there for. And it was sabotaged because the Chinese and the Indians locked themselves in a room and said, "We're not coming out. Go sign your own death pact yourself."
You know, it's you talk about carbon neutrality and all this other stuff, and you know what? There's a few buzzwords that I hear, and anytime I hear it, it's like that's freaking communist, global communist. Inclusivity and inclusion and sustainability. I'm a big crypto guy, so and anyway, I listen to some of these guys on some of the videos they talk about, and even the guys in the crypto industry. I mean, you see the narrative they're pushing right now in this carbon neutrality crap, and it's like there's more than enough electricity to go around, and I just don't. I guess I'm a little bit conflicted on where are some of the projects that I want? Where do they stand? And are they gonna, is the technology gonna come through, or anyway, I'm not asking you. I'm just expressing some of my frustration. So,
oh man, yeah, I absolutely. Well,
how are you doing on time, Matt?
I'm good. I just had a cancellation. I was supposed to have a thing at 5:00, but it's canceled. So whenever you guys want to go on for another half hour or something, or
yeah, we actually have about 1/2 hour at most.
I've got about 20 minutes. I got about 20 minutes because I've got to walk the dog before the next show.
Why don't we do this? Let's. I don't want to kill it, but I have a couple of questions I want to ask him off the air, and
we can hook up another show. In a
exactly.
Week or whatever.
Exactly. No, let's because but I have a couple of questions I want to ask. I just don't want to ask in a public forum. So
sure.
So let's.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things we opened up. I mean, we started talking about Aaron Burr and his complicity in trying to destroy the United States. Didn't. So there's a lot to pick up next time we talk.
Yeah. No. It's so rare. I love talking to Warhamster because Warhamster and I are, we're the same yet we're different. But I love making acquaintances of people who are smarter than me. So and Warhamster knows things that I don't, and I know things that he doesn't, and
we're all learning from each other, right? We all have blind spots, we all have strengths,
absolutely.
So it's just a matter of working together.
Well, man, I want to thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the more we learn what we don't know. It
keeps you humble, right? Like when you really are making discoveries, you're just becoming more aware of how little you know, and it's humbling. It's not something that you're doing it right if you're not being arrogant after you're accumulating knowledge. If you're becoming more arrogant and elitist, then that it's probably not real knowledge you have. You're probably just speaking a language that other people don't understand and feeling more elite.
Right.
It's not real earning.
We know some of those people.
Oh, yes, we do.
Yeah.
Yes, we do. Well, Matt, hey, I want to thank you for taking the time and coming on today. And we'll definitely schedule another one to have you come on. You and your wife. You guys are both binge watching you two over the last week, and it's just been, or weekend rather, was a great pleasure. I learned a lot about you guys, and you guys are brilliant minds and definitely an asset. I'm embarrassed that I've only heard of you just recently. So,
well, hey, it's got to happen eventually. So I'm glad that we finally did touch base, and I'm looking forward to future conversations.
absolutely.
Thank you, man. I appreciate
Thanks for your time.
All right, guys.